Powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios. This is Football at 4.
And Football at 4 is powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Of course, Geoff Mosher is here on a Wednesday. We'll take a look at this Eagles-Jaguars thing and all things surrounding the Birds. Nick Sirianni today. Doug Pederson today as well. Dougie P's back in Philly. And I'm sure he'll be well received. It should be an interesting. I want to get Geoff Mosher's take on this. Because we did see Andy come back. We've seen guys in the past. But Doug Pederson, I feel, Jeff, it's going to be a very interesting dynamic at the start of this game. It's a 3-0 Eagles team that everybody's hyped about. They're getting a lot of attention. A lot of energy goes into, like, being excited about your team on game day. But then you got this guy coming in here. Is that going to kind of like flatten out some of the excitement for your team as you're kind of like, I don't think he's going to get booed by any stretch of the imagination, but like, how do they kind of appropriate their energy towards Doug Pederson?
Yeah, I think we've done this a few times before. Donovan McNabb coming back. As you mentioned, Andy Reid came back.
Nobody's ever won the Super Bowl and come back.
Right. So I think that he will receive a very warm welcome. I think he's going to get a great ovation, and then the game's going to start. And then, I don't think there's going to be any inner conflict in the second quarter if Trevor Lawrence throws a touchdown pass to Christian Kirk. Like, do I boo Doug Pederson's team? I don't think that goes through the fans' mind. I mean, I don't know. I haven't been to a game as a fan in God knows how long, but I just sense that it'll be love for Doug Pederson, and then the game, the ball gets kicked off, and then it's you're the enemy.
Yeah, I agree. It's just going to be a weird like dynamic of the you're so jacked up. Let's go. Let's beat this team. Hey, and I would imagine the Eagles are going to do some sort of thanks, Doug. Welcome, Doug. Doug's back. I don't know.
I hope so. I would imagine so. Yeah, I mean it'd be hard to just ignore it. I mean, you got to do something for the guy. Yeah.
He said today he's never seen the statue and, this whole weird dynamic, but he's got an interesting team coming in here, Most. Let's kind of start with them. It's a team that went on the road last week, beat up on the Chargers. It's a young team that really struggled the last couple of years. They did go to the AFC Championship game not too long ago. A lot of those guys are now gone. And after that run, they've had a lot of down times, but I think Doug has kind of changed the culture with a lot of the same players who were there in the past. They did add some guys with some money, but it's definitely an interesting Jacksonville team coming in this early in the year.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is something you could see from the start. You probably could have predicted that Doug Pederson was going to go in and change the culture. I mean, the bar was fairly low because of the Urban Meyer, but Doug is the right guy when you need your culture change. He's always been very relatable for the players. He's always been a guy that players rallied around. And so you could see instantaneously that, or predict that he would have his finger on the pulse of that locker room. I know Adam Kaplan was down there in Jacksonville for part of his training camp, and he kind of described it as a Doug P. love fest going on. I mean, when you compare that to what they had last year and all the bad vibes, not surprisingly, but then they've turned that not just into good culture, but obviously into winning now after 3 weeks. And Mike, they've outscored their last two opponents 62-10. And those opponents were the Colts and the Chargers. I mean, two teams that didn't make the playoffs last year, but I think teams that people respect anyway and felt that would be on the up and up more so this year. I mean, the Chargers still have a chance, even with all their injuries, to be a good team. So for the Jaguars to go out to the West Coast and win 38-10 and have that kind of scoring margin over the last 2 weeks, I think is a testament to Doug's ability to take that team and get it playing together and for each other fairly quickly.
Yeah, I know that they spent a lot of money at that wide receiver position. A lot of people kind of scratched their heads, but I want to talk about the quarterback, Moj. This was a guy that everybody thought was going to be a generational game-changing player at that position. Nick Sirianni was asked about Trevor Lawrence today, but what are the Eagles seeing with Trevor Lawrence? I don't think we got a good read on what he really was last year.
No, I mean, this is like starting from scratch with a real head coach for Trevor Lawrence, and you can see the development already. I wouldn't, it's not like he's out there looking like Aaron Rodgers per se, but he only has one interception in 111 attempts. So that just shows you he's been a great caretaker of the football. He has generally spread the ball around, and Jose Jones, I think, is leading them in receptions, but Christian Kirk is leading them in receiving yards. Evan Ingram's gotten in the mix there. Trevor Lawrence doesn't have a ton of passing yards compared to some of the leaders, but he's got 6 touchdowns passes to 1 interception, and he's completing close to 70% of his passes. So you can sort of see already the caretaker of the football, the high completion percentage. You can see the comfort that Trevor has in a real offense, in a Doug Pederson offense. I would say the next step for them, and I don't know if they have the personnel to do it, but is to try to stretch the field, because we know that's a big part of what Doug likes to do, sometimes to a fault. They really don't have a whole lot of deep plays. I went and looked in the NFL leaders in passing or receptions of 20 or more yards, and they're very, very low on the list. So they've been able to score and be efficient and move the ball effectively, but aren't necessarily a tremendous perimeter threat. They're sort of matriculating the ball down the field.
Well, I think anytime we look at an Eagles matchup, Jeff, it always has to start with, what does that team's offensive line look like? Because we know John Gannon wants to win right there up front without sending the pressure. If he wants to pressure Trevor Lawrence this week, are they going to have to get more than just the front four going?
Well, Doug likes his offensive line. It's clearly played fairly well for them to have done what they've done, both in the running game and the passing game. They've got some money invested in their tackles. I think they also have some in guard. They've reshaped it. So it's been I would say this is obviously going to be a better offensive line than the one they faced on Sunday against Washington. So I would not expect an onslaught or a barrage of sacks. But nonetheless, I think the Eagles still are a team that you expect them to win battles in the trenches. And the big test will be what they do on the back end. What the biggest ingredient to all those 9 sacks, Mike, was what they were doing in coverage. When they're playing a lot of matchup zone coverage, which is sort of like it's zone, but with man concepts built in. It's a little bit like if you relate to college basketball, what John Chaney or Jim Boeheim do, right? They play zone, but when you watch the ball get rotated against them and you see how fast the defenders move from the defender to defender to offensive player, it sort of looks like man at times. And really what you have the Eagles doing is trying to and they did a great job of it against Washington, which is take away those middle crossing routes, those pick plays, by having the cornerbacks kind of cover and then deliver to the next guy in the field, into the middle of the field. And that takes a lot of communication, takes being able to be sticky for 3 to 5 seconds, or maybe not that long, but 1 to 3 seconds, which is an eternity in football. And they did a really good job of that in Washington. And once you took that sort of first or second read away from Carson, then the pass rush was all up on him. So they'll have to do that to Trevor Lawrence. They're going to try to take away his first read, make him go to number 2, and hope that the pressure gets there. It did against Carson Wentz. It didn't per se against Jared Goff. It was okay at times against Kirk Cousins. But again, that was with Kirk Cousins. They had a blitz. So it'll be sort of fascinating to see how they respond from last game.
Of the 3 teams they've seen, where do you kind of put this Jacksonville team?
I don't know. They lost to the Washington Commanders. So I have trouble getting past that. And maybe, again, a lot of people want to bang on Washington and bang on Carson Wentz after they get humiliated. But I don't think that does any service to the Eagles, because I'd say the Eagles made that happen. Those Kirk Cousins looked pretty good the week after last week, right? He beat the Lions, and Carson Wentz had looked pretty good for the first 2 weeks, was among the leaders. So you got to give credit to the Eagles there. But I really don't know what this Jacksonville team is really all about. Look forward to seeing it more. But again, what they've done the last 2 weeks has been fairly impressive. You can make the argument that the Chargers are all banged up. It wasn't really the Chargers, but this is still the Jacksonville Jaguars, who won 3 games last year, and they already have 2 wins now. So I think they have to be considered pretty formidable.
Yeah, I think the one thing, that this team, as we kind of said, is they've changed the culture, Moshe, and I don't know how many wins that's worth, right? But at least now they're a team with a direction, which is something they weren't a
Yeah.
year ago. Like you would play
Right.
them and they had no direction. They didn't know what they wanted to do. They didn't know who they were. They now at least they might not be talented enough to beat a team at like Philadelphia on the road right now, but you at least know there's going to team that's going to be coming in with a plan, a game plan. What does culture? How many games does that win you? I don't know about that, but that's the difference where this team is now.
Yeah, and they've got young players that, as you're saying, you can see them building around. They're going in the right direction. I mean, obviously Trevor Lawrence is one, but Devin Lloyd, their linebacker from
Yeah.
Utah, I know a lot of Eagles fans loved him and hoped that they would get him somehow. He's off to a pretty good start. Christian Kirk's contract was laughed at, and deservedly so. He's not a $24 million receiver, but he is doing a good job. In fact, I think he's fourth among receivers in the NFL right now on third down, meaning his catches lead to a first down. So he's clearly been a good safety valve there for Trevor Lawrence. They got two pass rushers in number one overall pick Trayvon Walker and Josh Allen, who's been a pretty good pass rusher in this league for a few years, but sort of flies under the radar, right, because he plays for the Jaguars. And one of their free agent signings on defense, Foye Oluokun from he went to Harvard, I believe. He was playing with the Falcons. He's a really good player too. So they have a good front seven with some guys who can rush the passer and some guys at the linebacker level who can just run and cover. And I think that's really starting to come together for them. So when you put that and an improving offense together, and you see, obviously with James Robinson and Travis Etienne, like you're saying, they've got nice young components, got a few veterans in there too, like Evan Ingram and Brandon Sharf. And so they're Doug Pederson said he thought this Jaguars team was way ahead of where his 2016 Eagles team is. Remember, that team started off 3-0 and finished, I believe, 7-9.
Jeff, Jeff, you wrote an interesting piece over at InsideTheBirds.com, and I asked you about offensive line, but I guess you got to look at the Eagles secondary and the job they're doing in how that will factor in this week against guys like Christian Kirk and Zay Jones, who are not Terry McLaurin, who are not Justin Jefferson. They are not Amon-Ra St. Brown, who's really developed into, I don't want to say a number one receiver, but he's put himself into a tier ahead of Christian Kirk and Zay Jones and their crew. So I would imagine the Eagles secondary is going to have a significant advantage this week.
I would agree. Well, yeah, I would think so. I mean, listen, I don't. It's a marriage here between your front end and your back end and what you're doing to your quarterback. So I don't want to say that the Eagles secondary is, man for man is so much better than Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson and Logan Thomas. I think that the offensive line issues came into play there, and then the quarterback issues also came into play there. So if Trevor Lawrence is well protected and he can get from read to one, read two, and you have to ask these guys to run just a little longer, then maybe it's a different story. But to your point, what the Eagles are able to do this year is entirely different schematically than what Jonathan Gannon can do last year. And some of the names you didn't hear much on Sunday but had really big impacts were James Bradbury, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, for example, Kazir White. And because, again, on those sort of man zone concepts underneath, when you're kind of running with a guy and then passing him off, and you're making those zone windows tighter and more difficult to throw into and forcing the quarterback away from him, that's because you got sticky coverage going on for 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 steps. And they couldn't do that with Anthony Harris last year, and they couldn't do it with Steven Nelson. How do I know? Because they didn't, right? I mean, they played both those guys. And not only that, but you now see Eagles cornerbacks playing up more at times on wide receivers. He's not afraid that if they do get beat, that the safety's not going to get there in time or can't reverse. So he's been able to play a variety of back end coverages because he has versatile guys who can run and cover.
I know one of the things you and Adam looked at on this week's edition of the Inside the Birds podcast, which I encourage everybody to go listen to because both guys really got some good breakdowns on what they saw. And I guess one thing is that gets fired at Shane Steichen yesterday and Nick Sirianni today is the development of Jalen Hurts. So what are people seeing from Hurts in his development through these first 3 games as to why he's having MVP level success?
Yeah, I know people who, watched the tape, graded it, league personnel sources would probably tell you that his game against Minnesota was the best game of the three so far. Just checking off all the boxes, but that's not to diminish how well he did play against Washington. He did an excellent job of putting the ball up where only his receivers could make plays. He's been way more accurate this year, and a large part of that is having his feet set. His mechanics are good. They're fundamentally sound because he's not trying to make throws on the run. He's not always leaving the pocket too early. If he does leave the pocket, he keeps his eyes down the field. And then if he has the opportunity to stop and throw, or throw with his feet planted at least after leaving the pocket, he will do that. And that's different than what you saw last year. You saw a lot of mechanical breakdowns that caused throws that didn't have enough velocity or torque and were either be misplaced or intercepted or just, sailed. So sort of like what you saw from Carson Wentz on Sunday. Not good mechanics, and therefore that leads to a different throw than you're anticipating.
Hey,
he did a really good job of that against Washington.
I want to get your thoughts. One of the guys we talked a lot about today is TJ Edwards and the role that he has on this defense. We're talking about the pass rush. We talk about the secondary. What we haven't been talking about a lot this year is the linebackers, and that's a good thing. And it's because normally when we've talked about the linebackers is they stink, they can't do anything, they're getting exploited, teams are going right after them. Doesn't seem like they are now, and TJ Edwards is a big reason, I think, that this defense up front and in the back can do what they want to do.
No question about it. No question. Not just is he a good run stopper and instinctive, he's been good in coverage too, which is not an area where he has excelled a whole lot. He's been so good in coverage, Mike, to the point where he is the only linebacker on the field when they're in a dime personnel, which is a one linebacker, 6 defensive back personnel. If we were going into the season, like if you asked me in August, if the Eagles are in dime, give me the depth chart at linebacker, right? I would have probably said, well, Kaiser White 1, Nakobe Dean 2, and Davion Taylor, who's not even on the team right now. I probably would have put him 3rd, and then TJ Edwards 4th. And he has completely turned the table on me and anybody else, and risen all the way to the top. So, this is Kaiser White, who's playing well. His specialty is running and covering. He's a converted safety, and they still have TJ Edwards out there in those situations. And we keep getting asked, and it's sort of mind-boggling to me, but Adam and I keep getting emails and tweets and, questions, ask ITB, when's Nakobe Dean going to play? When's Nakobe Dean going to play? And I get it. I understand the hype, but who are you taking off the field to put Nakobe Dean in? What's broken that you think you're fixing by putting Nakobe Dean in the game? You're just getting really outstanding play right now by TJ Edwards and Kaiser White. So there's really nothing to do here.
Right. This isn't like an NBA game where you take the guard out and give the guy 5 minutes to run the offense just so you give your guy a quick
Right.
breather, right? A lot of times,
right.
and
Yeah,
look,
you
I
don't
get
want
it.
to take these guys off the field.
Yeah, I get it. Fans like to see the rookies, especially a guy who was much hyped as Nakobe Dean was. People thought they were getting a special type of player that could really change the complexion of your defense. Well, right now, you got 2 guys playing at a level that your defense of complexion has changed.
They did get someone who's changing the complexion of the defense. They just had them all along.
Yeah. All right, Geoff Mosher, the Inside the Birds podcast, and of course, Inside the Birds pre and post game show every Sunday before and after every Eagles game. Greg Cosell's on the pregame, Trey Thomas on the post game show, and of course, they break out all the action after Eagles and Jaguars. Jeff's back on Monday. Tomorrow, it's Andrew DeCecco, and Adam is here on Friday's edition of Football at 4 on the Sports Bash. All right, Moshe, we'll talk to you, buddy.
All right, my friend. Take care.
There's Geoff Mosher, of course, here on the Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN.